If you've ever seen tsunami footage on YouTube, you'll notice it's not some big tidal wave. No, when a tsunami hits, the first thing that happens is the tide goes out. It's like the lowest low tide that you've ever seen. And if you don't know what that means, you're likely to just walk out there. Like, oh, look, it's a shipwreck, a coral reef, some new seashells. But if you know what this means, you don't go out there, you run for high ground, whether it's a hotel, a mountaintop, or whatever, because something is about to hit shore. I'm telling you right now, our entire culture, from pharmaceuticals to sports and the media, is completely out to sea when it comes to the whole topic of transgenderism. But what is about to hit our shore is an absolute tsunami of detransitioners. These are people who have begun the process of transitioning, who later realized, whoa, this was not the right decision. And these people are not just starting up little podcasts and websites and activism groups. They're starting multi-billion-dollar lawsuits. If you go to sites like reddit.com, you'll notice communities of more than 50,000 people screaming from the rooftops, get the kids off the puberty blockers, get the surgeries banned. There is a massive shift underway. Now, you may have seen in, popular literature websites that, hey, people who transition have an exceptionally low level of regret. In fact, it's only about 1 or 2% of people who go through these surgeries ever regret that decision. Okay, where are these numbers coming from? They even say, well, if you get a knee surgery, about 20% of people who get knee surgery end up later regretting that they went through that surgery. But for transitioning, it's like 1 or 2%. Where are they getting these numbers from? If you actually look at the research, you'll notice a couple things. One, there's no standardized rule for what constitutes regret. Some of the studies will only include people who legally change their name. And for if you haven't legally changed your name, like for example, in one study, to do that at the time in Sweden was very arduous, very costly. But if you didn't do it, it just didn't count as regret. And so you're lumped into the people that thought it was the best decision ever. A lot of these studies have very low sample sizes, meaning it's a dozen people or 24 people, not hundreds or thousands. All the studies are showing a massive loss to follow-up, meaning 50% of the people that they followed in the study just kind of disappeared and they don't have their answers. Many are often very short-term studies in terms of, do you regret it a year later? Well, if not, then you never regretted it. What about 10 years later, 20 years later? In fact, the biggest study that's ever been done, which was done over in Sweden, showed that about 8 to 10 years after the surgery is when the suicide rate started to climb to 19 times higher than the general population. If you isolate out the female to male transitioners, you're looking at a suicide rate more than 40 times as high as the general population. And people say, oh, it's because you transphobic religious bigots. If you were just more accepting and loving of these people, then they wouldn't feel the need to take their lives. This theory, called the social stress theory, has merit to it. Obviously, if these people are being bigoted and persecuted and people in their faith community or family, it's going to contribute to depressive symptoms. But this isn't the full story. The full story is that 90% of people who take their lives by suicide have a diagnosable mental health condition that needs clinical intervention. And puberty blockers, hormones, and surgery are not the answers to these things. Many people have dissociative symptoms at play, where it's a trauma response. They're dissociating from their own sexuality as a trauma response. I met a young woman a couple of weeks ago. When she was a 6-year-old girl, she had been abused in a horrible way. After that, she transitioned to a male identity in order to basically no longer solicit, so to speak, this type of attention from males. That if I don't look like a woman, then that's never going to happen again. Unfortunately, when this young girl was 12 years old presenting as male, she was abused as a male in an even worse way by another male. And she concluded by that, I'm not even safe presenting as a boy. And now she's identifying as non-binary, hoping at last that if she just doesn't look sexual at all in any way, that she'll finally be safe. And to tell such a young person, what you need is top surgery, what you need is puberty blockers, this is malpractice. You're actually creating more wounds for this individual instead of listening closely enough to the trauma they've been through and helping them to heal. And so today, to bust this myth that this is just a regret-free decision, it's just the best thing ever for everybody, our content producer, Josiah, is going to read to me, and these are the first time I'm going to be hearing these things, so you're going to be hearing it for the first time with me, stories on Reddit, on their Substack, on detrans. And so he's going to read these to me, and you're just going to get my live, so to speak, reaction to these things. And so you'll have a chance in your own heart to react with a broken heart to mine, listening to what these young people have gone through, what perhaps motivated them to make those decisions, and what they're thinking, whether it be 3 months or 3 years afterwards. Because sometimes after the procedure, they look at their body and there's elation, there's joy. Finally, my breasts are gone. I always hated them to begin with. Other times they look at their body and a new dysphoria is spawned. Wait a minute. Now that my breasts are gone, my hips look too big. Maybe I can get a surgery on that next. It's almost like this endless set of false summits, thinking once I get to that next place, all the dysphoria will be relieved, and they can never quite get there. And then a third reaction is they look at their body in absolute horror, calling up the surgeon or the doctor, like, can you put the parts back on? Which obviously they cannot. And these stories are not being heard. And so we want to advocate for the people who are contemplating going through this procedure. We're not sharing this information as hate speech because we're transphobic, but that we love individuals to tell them the truth. Because to give someone love without giving them the truth is false compassion. It is misguided mercy. And I would make a disclaimer at the top here that I know oftentimes you might listen to this program with kids in tow, but I would say if there are little ones around, I'm not sure. As I said, I have not read these, testimonies that are going to come in, but it's probably a bit of delicate information. So if you got younger ears around, maybe a different episode might be good for them. But Josiah, I'm going to pass it off to you. And as I had mentioned to our listeners, I'm going to be hearing these stories for the first time with you. So Josiah, what do we got? Hey, if this content is helpful to you and you want other people to see it, the best thing that you can do is like, comment, and subscribe. The more you interact with these videos, it bumps up the algorithm. YouTube shows them to exponentially more people. So please help us to spread the word. Like, comment, and subscribe. Like, comment, and subscribe.
The first one is titled, I Miss My Breasts So Much. It says, I'm sitting in bed crying because I just miss my breasts so much. I got top surgery when I was 18. I'm now 27. Even if I get implants, they won't actually be mine. I want mine back. Not only were they mine, but they were great looking. I will never have them back. Never, never ever thought that this would happen to me. I was always 1,000,000% sure I made the right decision. But the past couple of years, I've finally realized, and it's so hard to comprehend this and accept it. I'm going through a mourning period right now over my old body. I miss it so much. I look at girls nowadays, any girl at all, and I'm completely jealous. At least they still have their natural body. I feel like an imposter, like I can't even claim that I'm actually a girl, even though I am. My voice is I have no boobs. I'm constantly worried about passing as female, even though I am one. I feel so much regret, and this is eating me alive.
Oh, I think the first thing that comes to my heart is I would just ask everybody who's watching this to just pray for this girl. It's one thing to hear it and have your heart broken. You're like, oh, it's too bad. I wish you knew this or that. But let's take action to love this person by saying a prayer for her. Many of the girls are told before the surgery, look, if you regret it, you can just get your breast back. We got surgeries for that too. But I know one plastic surgeon who said, look, that's not the case. You can't get your breast back. What you get back is essentially a breast mound is what it's referred to. It is not functional. It doesn't have the same level of sensitivity as before. There's obviously additional health risks when it comes to getting implants. They don't tell the girls this stuff. They don't tell them, hey, I know at the age of 18, 15 or whatever, breastfeeding a kid a decade from right now might not even be on your radar. But what's going to happen when you turn 27, 28 years old, and perhaps your friends are getting married and you see women breastfeeding and you know that your body will not be able to nourish your child in that way. The benefits physiologically of breastfeeding are unbelievable. And when a woman realizes this, I read one study on breastfeeding and it was incredible. They said that when a baby is sick, the baby during the process of breastfeeding will actually backwash a little bit of saliva onto the woman's breast. Now, some of that saliva will enter into the woman's body, and her immune system will detect if there's any pathogen, bacterial, viral infection going on in the baby, and her body will create an immediate immunological response, creating essentially a homemade pharmacy, transferring to the baby the immunological memory of the mother if she has tangled with that pathogen in the past, pumping more than 1 billion white blood cells into the breast milk when she detects the baby is sick. The breast milk, if you pump breast milk, the woman pumps when the baby is healthy versus sick, the breast milk visibly looks different to the naked eye. In fact, the breast milk when the baby is sick looks a lot like colostrum. This is the breast milk that's first produced in the first couple days after delivery that are just loaded with white blood cells to establish the baby's immune system in this brand new world with all these unknown pathogens. After the couple days of delivery, the fuller breast milk comes in and it visibly looks different. They found that when the baby who had been sick, the illness is resolved, the woman's breast will detect that and resume the normal chemical composition. In fact, I read another article on it that said, so ladies, if anyone ever shames you for breastfeeding in public, just tell them you're performing a diagnostic test. And so the marvels of what God has created, of the sensitivity of the breast, the capability of nourishment of the breast. So much of this is broken and numbed out and irreplaceably lost. And so you just hear the brokenness of this girl. And maybe she doesn't even want to breastfeed a kid. Maybe she doesn't want to get, married or whatever. But just the feeling of alienation from your own body, that I'm never going to feel quite myself. Imagine if girls going through this procedure, and they've changed like the age of medical consent. Like in Oregon, it's 14 years old. A 14-year-old girl can get a radical double mastectomy without her parents' knowledge or permission. She can't even use a tanning bed in like Portland until you're, 18? You can't get a tattoo in Portland until you're like 21. But you can receive a bilateral mastectomy at the age of 14 without your parents' permission. It is absolute craziness. Imagine if just this one paragraph, Josiah, that you just read to me was just read to these girls before they did this. Look, I know you might not regret this right now and might not think it would be a problem, but this is a potential outcome of this procedure. These kids are not operating with informed consent. That's why Kira Bell, who's the girl over in England who got puberty blockers at 16, cross-sex hormones at 18, followed by a double mastectomy, got into her early 20s and looked at her body and she thought, what did I do to my body? And then looked up whoa, what did you adults let me do to my body? She sued the biggest gender clinic in the United Kingdom. Her court case went all the way up to the High Court in England, and these liberal progressive judges all ruled in her favor that she could not have had informed consent to undergo this procedure. And as a result of this legal decision, the largest gender clinic in the United Kingdom was shut down about a year and a half ago, fractured into smaller clinics that actually focus more on mental health. In fact, this clinic had only done one audit ever of the kids coming in. They audited about 125 of the kids coming in and found out that 98% of them had coexisting mental health conditions that need clinical intervention. But they didn't have enough psychologists on staff to deal with it, so they basically gave the kids one diagnosis: you are trans, and there's one answer: to transition. This is malpractice. They are contributing to mental illness instead of actually treating it. And so our hearts go out to young women like that because, I get it. As a teenage girl, it's not on your radar. I remember Abigail Schreier wrote this book called Irreversible Damage, and she points out in there, even if you do point out to some 15-year-old girl, now if you undergo this, might not be able to have kids if you go from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones. She said it doesn't even register with 15-year-old kids. That's like telling them the sun is going to burn out in 500 billion years. It's all right, it has no impact on me. The part of the brain in a teenager that is able to forecast outcomes of current behaviors and use that to weigh the judgment and decisions is the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, and it's totally underdeveloped until they're about 24, 25 years old. And so if you have a kid go through a procedure at 15 and you follow up at 18, hey, do you regret it? No. Let's follow up with them when they're 28, 38, see where things are. And unfortunately, more often than not, it's just what you read, Josiah. I want to thank all of those of you who are patrons to make this show possible. If you're interested in supporting the work that we're doing, please go to patreon.com/Jason Evert. By supporting the work that we're doing there, you will be chosen first on our live call-in show to answer any questions you have about life, love, and everything in between. Just go to patreon.com/Jason Evert.
My consent was not informed. I started transitioning when I was 16, a child. I had undiagnosed bipolar disorder, but no one bothered to screen me. If they did, they would have seen that I viewed transition as a way to throw myself away and try again. That I was traumatized by my childhood, that I self-harmed, but they didn't. They said, "Congrats," and handed me a referral. By the time I realized I was more depressed than ever before, I had already had a mastectomy and 2 years on testosterone. I was thrust into adulthood broken. I went through the detransition process, quit tea for over 5 years, and here at 27, I sleep 14 hours a day. My hair falls out. I can't stop gaining weight. I decided I had had enough and got a full medical workup done. My lab work revealed that I had almost no female hormones. I will never have children. I have PCOS. I have high cholesterol. I have cysts all over my ovaries. My PCP had to submit my results to a specialist because they were so unusually terrible, even for PCOS. I will be on weekly injections, diabetes medication, and who knows what else for the rest of my life. And at this point, I have no idea if I will ever get back to feeling energetic, out of pain, and a little bit normal. When I signed those papers, I was not informed of any of this. I was a child allowed to destroy my body permanently under the assurance that I can always change my mind and that it's a beautiful, harmless process. The informed consent model is a lie, because we are just guinea pigs to the medical experiment. My life is permanently afflicted, and I was not informed. I only wish my experience could mean anything, but all it will ever be is internet harassment and empty feeling. The medical community can't listen, and the trans community won't.
This is heartbreaking. I mean, what she's saying is absolutely true. When a person goes through the process of detransitioning, a lot of times they lose any support that they had so easily gained beforehand, meaning they got their LGBT straight alliance on campus and everybody loves them. They're the best thing ever. And then when they decide, I really don't think this is the right thing for me, a lot of them experience a feeling like I'm getting out of a cult. And when I decided it wasn't for me, many people just shunned me and said, well, maybe you were never trans in the first place, and just lost this whole community of support that they had, whether it was the medical community, it's like, oh, we're here to help you be the, the best version of yourself and fully authentic. And then when it's like, wait a minute, what did you do to my body? It's like, well, you chose it. Sorry, that's how it works. And there's so much like you can hear in this woman's voice going on beforehand. I remember we had on the podcast Chloe Cole, and she went through a top surgery. And she really shared openly on this episode that when she was in junior high, a boy groped her. And after she experienced that violation, she didn't know how to process that. All she knew is that she didn't want it to happen afterwards. And she said it was after that experience that she decided a top surgery was right for her. And so often when the kids are in the consultation with their gender specialist or whatever, why do you want to go through with this? The girl's not doing that deep introspective work. And the counselor's just looking at her like, well, hey, I want to relieve you of suffering. And so we've got these procedures, we got this puberty blockers, but dude, the litany of suffering that poor young woman is going through. I mean, you've got right now 15-year-old kids going through the symptoms of menopause, and she hasn't even gotten her driver's license yet. I mean, we've got 15-year-old kids in the trans community developing osteoporosis like an 80-year-old woman in a nursing home. And they say, well, it's all reversible. Dude, no, it's not. Look, if you miss the critical window of bone development in adolescence, you can't recoup that when you're 24. You don't get that back when you're 36. If you miss the window, it's done. And so if we've got kids in the trans community saying, hey, before I transition, I had never broken a bone, but now I've got broken toes, I got a broken wrist, broken this, broken that, brittle hips. Like, where are these people going to be when they turn 80 years old? I mean, in a wheelchair, getting pushed around, and then where are the doctors that made all the money off of these procedures? I mean, I'd hope they'd be in prison by then, or at least have their medical license stripped. But I mean, this is the greatest medical fraud of the century. I mean, this whole transition procedure is, mark my words, going to go down as the 21st century equivalent of the lobotomy. Well, that's a good idea. No, it's actually not. But there are going to be a host of sacrificial lambs like this young woman that are going to be offered on this altar of the transgender ideology before the truth actually comes to the surface. And I hope their voices are just proclaimed from the rooftop so that everybody can hear this is not gender affirmative care. This is not affirming the identity of these young people. It's giving them permission to reject the deepest truth of their identity. Might they feel dissociated from their sexuality? Well, maybe we should explore why that is. I mean, have these kids been exposed to these overly rigid gender stereotypes that if you don't fit the mold, then you're not part of the team? Maybe a lot of this is a misdirected attempt to navigate same-sex attractions. Well, I've never felt like one of the guys, one of the girls, and maybe that's because I'm in the wrong body. There's so many layers of complexity to the human person that are going on here. And so to flatten all of these layers into one layer of you're trans and so transition, like I've said before, this is absolute malpractice. Hey, we just got back from an unbelievable weekend in Yosemite, leading a wilderness backpacking retreat. Our next one coming up is going to be in Switzerland. We still have some spots for that. And then over to Italy for the canonization of Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. If you love the outdoors and you're a Catholic single young adult and you want to find faith and fellowship in the cathedral of God's creation, just go to jp2trails.com, sign up for a trip, and we'll see you in the wilderness.
This post is titled, I wonder why trans people bully and harass detrans people and then proceed to act surprised and upset when most detrans people are transphobic. After I detransitioned, my entire ex-friend group of mostly trans and queer people kept calling me by my trans name and using she/her pronouns for me. They would do it almost as a taunt. I found my new friends, a group of guys that were really cool and didn't know very much about my transition. The guys were less accepting of trans people, and so my ex-friends decided to tell them all about my transition to ruin my social life. It didn't really work because the guys understood that I was just going through some shit and that I was pretty lost, but an attempt was made. After this, I started looking into the ideology more and realized just how it was. This happens to detrans people all the time, but trans people always act like we're the mean ones or that we're the ones in the wrong. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
I'm glad to hear a voice here from a young man going through this. I think a lot of times in the detrans communities, you hear a lot from the females. I think in a sense, I don't know if it's an extra layer to the stigma or the shame when it comes to guys. Like you hear this, like I just want to fit in with the guys. And I feel like if this stuff comes out, then, it's going to be toast if my buddies know that I had lived this particular way. So I'm really glad to hear that this young man has found some guys, and I hope they've received him despite the backlash he got. But why, it's a very fair question he asked. Like, why are people in the trans community who typically celebrate themselves as the most diverse, the most inclusive, the most celebratory of all these differences, why do they tend to shun those who detransition? And this isn't just a here or there thing. I mean, you read the forums, this is a pandemic of people. Like I had that whole community, and as soon as I came out as deciding I want to detransition, just everybody just shunned me. Why is this going on? Because your presence threatens the very validity of the identity that they have chosen. A couple of things that are very core to the human need, the human person, is a desire to find a community of people, a mission, and an identity. And so when you have an adolescent person who feels kind of on the outside, maybe they were autistic, maybe they're experiencing same-sex attractions, maybe they just never felt that they fit in with other people. A friend of mine who went through the transition process and still is living in that identity, he said, I just don't feel like I fit in with the guys. He said, I feel like I'm mimicking the gorillas so they don't realize I'm not part of their group. And so if you have an individual who kind of feels on the outside, I've never felt like I'm quite one of these people, but then you find a community that like, wait a minute, these people are like me. They've wrestled with the sense of identity. Who am I? And I don't feel like I'm one of the guys. And you find that community, it feels like you're finding a part of yourself. You find that community, but then you find the identity piece, like that word non-binary, that really resonates with me, or trans woman or trans man, that's what I feel like. So I'm finding my identity, I'm finding my community, and then often they join these groups and they feel like they're finding this community and the mission as a marginalized minority, then now we've got a mission to spread trans rights. And so these deep human needs of identity, community, and mission are all in a sense being met in a counterfeit way through gender theory. Because if they're not finding their identity as a beloved son or daughter of God, they're not finding their community in the church, because the church is like, well, you need to solve your little gender dysphoria thing, and then you're welcome to be in the pew with all us holy people. Like, if that's what they're getting from church, they're not going to feel like they're finding their community there. They're not going to feel like they're finding their mission. But then they discover a community of people that are like-minded, been through the same stuff, and have this mission. Man, this becomes like your entire existence. And so for this person's friends who are still in this mindset that their identity is trans, and that's their community, that's their mission, his very presence of detransitioning threatens to undermine everything that they're hanging on to. If I didn't have this, I would just give up hope altogether. Your presence makes them want to just say, you don't exist, because if you're real, what if my decision wasn't the best decision? What if I shouldn't have gone on puberty blockers? What if I shouldn't have had that surgery? What if I shouldn't have been so forceful and shunning these family members away from me because they wouldn't use my declared new name or pronoun? Like, what if I went overboard? Your reality is a scary thing to them. And so I think they would much rather erase you and validate your decision and say, well, you were just never trans in the first place, because your presence is frightening. It shakes them at the very foundation. But I would say to try to reach out to them in love, that their identity, their community, and their mission isn't something that's going to be fulfilled and basically denying the reality of who God has created them to be for all eternity, that they can find their identity as a beloved son or daughter of God. They can find their community in the Catholic Church that's not expecting that you need to just resolve all your dysphoria and then you're at home with us. No, gender dysphoria is a mental health issue, and these individuals deserve love and compassion and fellowship. I mean, like this guy, the amount of healing that this guy can find just being loved by men, even if men found out about the past and say, hey man, we all got our dirt. We've all made some mistakes in our past, and like, we love you and we're glad to have you with us. The ocean of healing that could pour over that young man's heart. I really hoping that he's found that community. And if so, I think he's going to find his mission to be a witness to the truth on behalf of all the young people wrestling with their sexual identity, to realize that every person, as St. John Paul II said, who seeks the kingdom of God will find himself.